Objective personality culture commentary. So, what is this? This is me talking about objective personality, a new typology system that came out within the last decade. It builds on top of Carl Jung's work by adding two distinct pieces of intellectual property. The first being, instead of 8 psychological functions, they split the psychological functions into 2 distinct modalities, thereby ontologically representing 16 psychological functions. So instead of having 8 psychological functions, the original 4 functions of consciousness. Well, see, that's what makes it culture commentary, right? I'm saying we're talking about objective personality, and where do you really start? Do you start by giving the overview, the in-depth analysis? So for me, I really like to start by framing it in the context of theory, structure, and application / practice. I'm zooming out to see where can I find some of these other things. Yeah. Theory, structure, and application / practice. This channel's name is On Volume 6. And why is that the case? That's because this is the theoretical foundation for where we get our modern idea about psychological types. Except it's a double blind because it's called Volume 6, this channel specifically, but Volume 6 is actually just a revision of a translation by H.G. Baines. And actually, the better translation is actually the original translation, which is now in the public domain. So again, we started this off by saying that we're talking about objective personality culture commentary. So why are we starting here instead of anywhere else? Well, I finally said, hey, I need to start creating some content. So why not just start speaking into a camera and trying to contextualize how I'm thinking about these things and some of my thoughts and some of my feelings. So I first started this journey when I was attending university at a college of letters and sciences, and they introduced us to MBTI. MBTI led me to Carl Jung. Carl Jung led me to his body of work. His body of work led me to the Portable Jung, which was a product of the Viking Portable Library. And that was a supremely legit book, actually. Actually, if we're taking a journey through time, this is that original book. This is that original book. Ooh, dusty. This is I did underlining, so I was like, hey, let me throw back another one. And then I was looking for Volume 6, like the actual version, and I found this one, but I had an audiobook from Audible, and then it didn't sound right, so I didn't even realize at that time that there were 2 different versions of Volume 6. And it's important for me to recognize that the first translation has a higher, provenance? Yeah, than Volume 6 itself. But this channel is named Volume 6 because I think it's catchy, and I like to think that I'm reminding us to go back to the source material, the classic contents. I like this version because there's a foreword by John Beebe, and more importantly, the citations are good in terms of the footnotes, so you can use that. But again, why am I talking about objective personality culture commentaries? Because I'm talking about psychological types first and foremost, full stop. what it means for me to be talking about psychological types is not to specifically say, hey, there's no way to move on from volume 6. There's no way to move on from the psychology of individuation. It's moving through that and saying, okay, well, what technical affordances did we gain from MBTI, from the theoretical addition of a grant function stack, which technically already exists within the core source material. You just have to put it together. It's actually at the end of the general description of the types, and there are theoretical rationalizations for that in the type problem in psychopathology, in terms of how we get the visualization of a psychological function in terms of an elongated psychological function for the extroverted functions, and then a smaller, more compressed visualization of a psychological function for the introverted functions. I found that to be interesting, and I guess that's why it's culture commentary, but not necessarily objective personality culture commentary. Objective personality comes into the picture about... So I had my Portable Young, and I was reading through it, and I was identifying with different functions, trying to feel it out. And then I settled into introverted intuition. And that was my personal go-to in terms of choosing, okay, well, I'm thinking of a perception function, and I'm thinking of the introverted attitude. So I thought, SI, that sounds kind of abstract. I don't know about that. And then intuition, and then you get caught up in all the different elements of culture commentary surrounding it. But this was before I discovered Science Insanity, and before I actually dipped my toe into Volume 6 specifically. Actually, if I go into the library, I have a printed version of Volume 6 of the collected works of Carl Jung. So we might actually go through that if I can move the camera to it to break it down. So, objective personality culture commentary. Why is it relevant? Well, in my personal opinion, I think that objective personality comes the closest to furthering the work of Carl Jung by building on the theoretical basis as a foundation. And I guess that's what this channel is going to be about. It's about pressure testing that from a theoretical perspective. The hardest thing about dealing with objective personality and objective personality culture commentary is that when it comes to objective personality as an institution, they mostly focus on applications/practice, which is clutch, but it's really focused on, hey, well, based on where they're at, how do we hone in on operationalizing these linguistic abstractions in order to be able to test for our observations? Meaning, okay, so we're saying that there exists not just 8 psychological functions, but 16 psychological functions. And we're saying that's the first intellectual property addition from objective personality. And then the second intellectual property addition is to stabilize the grant function stack with the modalities included as a substrate, and then building on top of that in terms of a higher order combinatoric. So instead of your 4 functions being listed as most to least differentiated, now that's fixed, that's stabilized, and then there's a higher order combinatoric that they refer to as a animal function that links or bridges psychological functions. So instead of just, okay, this is the most differentiated, second most differentiated, third most differentiated, fourth most differentiated, that's fixed, that's stabilized in terms of ordonance. It's a term I'm using for animal function temperaments. So that's fixed. But now we're linking it in terms of its energetic orientation, which is why I like it as a result of furthering Jung's work in terms of on psychic energy. I believe this is volume 7, question mark, pause. Okay, so if we take a stroll through some notes, we'll get to volume 8, Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche. And this is an interesting one because this is actually the core theoretical basis of a lot of stuff. Specifically here, to refer to what I was talking about, it was on psychic energy. And that's really important because for me, this sets the theoretical basis not just for nominalism and / or realism, but for this concept of an energetic perspective related to a final cause argument and a mechanical argument. I don't know if I'm doing due diligence enough to describe it, but we'll get into it later. I have 15-minute segments that I'm working with. But yeah, so this was just the theoretical basis, right? Saying the first part was the introduction of the sexual modalities as from a splitter's perspective, actually saying that they might have potentially completed Jung's quaternity in terms of psychological functions by going from 8 psychological functions to 16 psychological functions. And the second intellectual property achievement was discovering or qualifying the existence of animal functions as a higher order combinatoric. So you have linking 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 2 to 4, and 3 to 4. And again, we'll get into that. It's what makes objective personality such an interesting addition to the personality type space, to the psychological function space. But I guess the claim that I'm making here is that out of all the different systems to follow and to focus on, I'm personally choosing to figure out how and to what extent objective personality builds on top of the basis of Jung's work in general or specific. So yeah, I guess it's like, what is objective personality? What does it mean? I guess we'll go into that in greater detail in further entries. So far, this has been Objective Personality Culture Commentary. So if you have any topics that you'd like to go into further, let me know, or if I'm beating around the bush to get to your specific psychological type within the objective personality system. We've built out animal function temperaments, so as a mode to visualize psychological functions. So yeah, let me know if that interests you, and I guess that's where I'll be signing off right now. Objective Personality Culture Commentary Part 1.